I'm a person who's slow to get it sometimes. I am a person who is slow on the uptake. My kids can attest to this. We have a van that has an automatic door, that I can control from the driver's seat there. So when I drop the kids off at school, I will push that button to open the automatic door to let them out. Well, now that my kids are in different schools, by the time I'm getting to drop Anya off, our youngest, she's the last one that I drop off in the series there, she's crawled up to the front seat if she wasn't sitting there already, and then I pull up to drop her off. I'm like, I love you, sweetie, and I push the button for that door, and it slides open, but she's sitting in the front seat. She's not by that sliding door. She's like, Daddy, you did it again. It's this habit that I get into. I'm just kind of slow on the uptake. Sometimes, my family, they're waiting for supper. I'm doing the last minute preparations, and I've got something in the oven, on the stove, in the toaster oven, and I get myself distracted. And like, you did it again, didn't you? Yep, I burned the food. It's like, what's that smell? I'm like, oh no, and I run to the toaster oven and pull it out, and like, it's a little darker than it's supposed to be. It's a little smokier than it's supposed to be. I did it again. A little slow to learn. Now, I'm not the only one. I have to attribute this to some in my family as well. We have a dishwasher that, the way our particular one works, if it's in the top rack of the dishwasher, there's a jet that shoots down into a little like receptacle funnel there, okay? And when the water goes inside of there, it causes the little blade to spin around and spin on everything. Well, inevitably, probably once a week, somebody puts a bowl in there right next to that little funnel. And what does it do? Flops over the top of the funnel, and it doesn't get clean if you put it there. And I have mentioned it so many times, and it still happens. Or on the bottom rack, the spinner down there does not have a jet right in the middle of it. So if you stick something upside down in the bottom rack of the dishwasher, there's no water going to get in that thing. And you pull it out, and it's still crusty with whatever you had for dinner last night. I don't know how many times I've mentioned it. It still happens. Okay? So it's a family trait, but since I'm the patriarch of the family, I've passed it down. So we're slow to learn. Okay? It just comes slow in the uptake. Now, if you've been tracking with us through the Gospel of Mark, you realize that the disciples are also a little bit slow on the uptake. Jesus has to repeat some things over and over, and they don't seem to get it. Like he talks about the value of children and receiving the kingdom like a child and receiving little children. And we saw recently, they're kind of slow to get that. They were trying to send the kids away. Trusting him for protection. They're out in the middle of the storm, and Jesus is asleep. He's relaxed. No big deal, and they're freaking out. They didn't understand that if he's there, they're going to be safe. He's going to take care of them. Or remember, there's actually 2 mass feedings that Jesus did. There's the feeding of the 5,000, but that's followed by the feeding of the 4,000. But at both times, I can imagine at the first time, the disciples were like, where are we going to get food to feed all these people? But when it comes to the feeding of the 4,000, how can we feed all these people? Don't they remember Jesus multiplied the loaves and the fishes? They're a little slow on the uptake. Now, they're also a little bit slow to understand what it means that he is the Messiah. And that's kind of where we're at right now. You can turn to Mark chapter 10 is where we're going to be. And they're not quite getting it. Now, we've seen in the recent weeks here as we've gone through Mark, in like Mark chapter 8, verse 31, he's predicting his death that's coming up. And he says, he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he was stating the matter plainly. But what does Peter do? Peter takes him aside and rebukes him. Okay? Now this was the first prediction that we have in Mark of his death. But it's not the last. Okay? So now chapter 9, verse 31. What does Jesus say? He was teaching his disciples and telling them, the Son of Man is to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And when he has been killed, he will rise 3 days later. What's their response? They didn't understand this, but they're afraid to ask him about it. And today, we're going to come to another prediction of Jesus' death, and then see how it is that they respond to that one. The concept of Messiah, they had one picture, and Jesus had another. And because their concept of Messiah was one thing, and Jesus didn't fit it, they could not grasp what he was really saying. They couldn't get the fact that Messiah can't die. Dead men don't set up kingdoms. There's no way that he could set up a kingdom if he's dead. So it just kind of went right over their heads. So Jesus is going to challenge their thinking again. He's challenged them on their about faith, how they think about status, about wealth, about relationships. And in chapter 10, he's going to challenge them a third time as he makes a final prediction of his suffering. Now, if you're taking notes in your sermon notes there, you can fill in those blanks. The first one is suffering. So chapter 10, and we're going to start in verse 32. They were on the road going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was walking ahead of them. And they were amazed, and those who followed were fearful. And again he took the 12 aside and began to tell them what was going to happen to him, saying, "Behold, we are going to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death, and will hand him over to the Gentiles. They will mock him, and spit on him, and scourge him, and kill him, and 3 days later he will rise again." Now, it's going to help if we picture the scene that was just described to us. Jesus going to Jerusalem, and it kind of describes two groups. Now, the first "they" that it mentions there, I think, is the 12. It doesn't really spell it out for us, but because it was just talking about the 12, I'm assuming they're the ones that are amazed. Jesus is in the lead, and the disciples, the 12, are amazed. Why? Why are they so amazed at where he's walking and how he's going? But there's another group that's there, too. It talks about those who followed. And what were they? They were fearful. Why? Well, the answer to why the disciples were amazed and why this other group, which may have been disciples, may have been other people that were following, were fearful, same answer for both of them. Because Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. He is in the lead, but he's not just on the lead in a hike. This isn't just going for a stroll. He's on a mission. He's heading to a specific place for a specific purpose. In Luke chapter 9, verse 51, it says that he set out resolutely for Jerusalem. It's actually, he set his face toward Jerusalem. I am focused and I am going. He's going there on purpose, and he's going there for a purpose. Now, if he's going there as Messiah, what is he going to do? He's going to set up a kingdom, right? And so since he is going to set up a kingdom, how do you think the current kingdom's going to take to that? A new person shows up and says, no, that's my throne. You get off. There's going to be trouble. So why do you think this crowd is a little bit nervous? Well, they've been excited that, he's saying he's the Messiah, where he's the expected one. Remember, they previously even wanted to already make him king. And so they're excited about this until they start nearing Jerusalem. Oh, okay, well, you go ahead, Jesus. You go ahead and set up your kingdom. I'll be there as soon as it's ready. I don't want to get caught in the crossfire. I don't want to be collateral damage in what's about to take place, because this could get really ugly really fast as a new kingdom is coming. They're expecting trouble. Now, there was a video that I saw of military training one time, and this is an older black and white video, but it showed a group of soldiers running. You know, they got their helmets and their rifles and everything like that, and they run, and they come to a barbed wire barrier. And you know what the first one or two people in that column of soldiers did? They run, and they flopped themselves right on top of that barrier. And what did everybody else do? Walked right over the top of them. And I'm thinking, there's leadership right there. When you are the first one to reach and you lay yourself down in order to bring everybody else after you. Jesus is in the lead, but he is not in the lead in order to be the first on the throne. He's in the lead to be the first to sacrifice. And the disciples don't really get this. So people are fearful, but they're still not fully understanding. Now, Jesus has this private word for his disciples. Now, when it says disciples, this is the 12. Disciples is a large group. The 12 are the apostles, but Mark often refers to them as disciples. So he pulls the 12 aside, and he says, here, I need to explain this to you about the self-sacrifice. When he gets there, he's going to suffer. He's going to die. And this is actually the most detailed of the three predictions that he's made, because it says some additional information the other ones didn't. He says who's going to do it. The Jews are going to hand him over to the Gentiles, and the Gentiles are going to put him to death. And he also said that it's going to be in Jerusalem. He hadn't told them that before. So these additional bits of detail. Now, the details are not what we need to focus on, though. What we need to focus on is how the disciples missed the point. There's a huge contrast between where we are in verse 34 and what's going to happen to Jesus, and the conversation that starts in verse 35. Because in verse 35, Jesus had just shared about suffering, and they are worried about their seating. Their seating, okay? So let's go ahead and read verses 35 to 37. James and John, the two sons of Zebedee, came up to Jesus saying, Teacher, we want you for you to Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. And he said to them, what do you want me to do for you? And they said, grant that we may sit one on your right and one on your left in your glory. Now, this is not so much about seating as it is about standing. Standing in terms of position. Because when a king is on his throne, the two most important positions in the kingdom, aside from the king, are the one that's on his right and the one that's on his left. So James and John, two brothers, they come to Jesus and say, we want to have those two spots. You know, we're part of your followers here. Please give us those two spots when you come into your kingdom. And this is there's a lot of problems with this request, okay? So I just want to run through a few of them here. First of all is the dissatisfaction that they show. There's dissatisfaction in this because Jesus has already given them a promise. And we don't see it in Mark, but back in Matthew chapter 19, verse 28, Jesus told them, truly I say to you that you who have followed me in the regeneration, when the Son of Man will sit on his glorious throne, you also shall sit upon 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. So they had already been promised thrones, but that wasn't enough. We want the two best thrones. We want the two best seats in the whole kingdom aside from yours. Then they're also impatient. They're asking now. They're not waiting for the kingdom to actually come. They're saying, we want it right now. And they seem to be kind of elbowing out the other disciples too, right? Because they're walking along and like, hey, Jesus, let's have a private conversation here. Let's talk about this. Can we have those two seats? We'll find out later that didn't go over so well with the other 10 of the followers. Now, if you look in Matthew chapter 20, though, it'd probably be good if you actually turn there in your Bibles if you can. Matthew 20, starting in verse 20, we find out that there was another factor in this that makes this all kind of messed up. Okay? I'm going to read to you Matthew 20, starting in verse 20. Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee, okay, this is James and John's mom, okay, she came to Jesus with her sons, bowing down and making a request of him. And he said to her, what do you wish? And she said to him, command that in your kingdom these two sons of mine may sit, one on your right and one on your left. So we find out that though the request in Mark is just put as from James and John, their mom actually did. Now, whether she initiated this or whether they put her up to it, this is a problem. If you're wanting a leadership role, don't send your mom to ask for it. It kind of undercuts the impression that you're leaving there. And so, that's one more problem. Now, the last one, though, it's real clear that Jesus knew whom to address, though. She comes, and both in Matthew and in Mark, he addresses James and John. Doesn't even address the mom as he responds. And so, what does he say? Well, let's go now to verse 38. But Jesus said to them, this is James and John, you do not know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or to be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized? And they said to him, we are able. And Jesus said to them, the cup that I drink you shall drink, and you shall be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized. But to sit on my right or on my left, this is not mine to give, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared. Now, this whole idea of a cup and baptism, these are metaphorical statements that are given. Now, in the Old Testament, a cup represents that which is allotted to you by God. If God gives you a cup to drink, this is what you are to receive from him. And just one example of that, Jeremiah 25, verse 15. We'll go ahead and go to that one. For thus the Lord, the God of Israel, says to me, take this cup of the wine of wrath from my hand and cause all the nations to whom I send you to drink it. The wine of wrath. Okay, if God pours something in a cup and gives it to you, you don't have the option of saying no thank you. All right? And so Jesus is saying, are you guys able to drink the cup that I have to drink? Or are you able to be baptized with the baptism? So what's this idea of baptism? Well, in the Old Testament, oftentimes the idea of going underwater is a scary thing. It is not a positive thing. So if you look at Psalm 69, verses 1 and 2, just as an example. We'll read these off the screens here. Save me, O God, for the waters have threatened my life. I have sunk in deep mire, and there is no foothold. I have come into deep waters, and a flood overflows me. It is a scary thing to be underwater. And if you didn't put yourself there. I mean, if you're diving and swimming, but if you're trying to cross a stream and you dip under the water, it's a scary thing. it's a representative of trouble. So Jesus is saying, can you drink the cup that God is giving me to drink? Can you go through the trouble that I am going to go through? In Luke chapter 12, verses 49 and 50, Jesus, he shares with the disciples a little, where he's saying basically what he is going to be enduring. Chapter 12, verses 49 and 50. I have come to cast fire upon the earth, and how I wish it were already kindled. But I have a baptism to undergo, and how distressed I am until it is accomplished. I've got something to go through. I've got some suffering, a transition time that I'm going to be going through. He knows that he's going to die. And so he's telling James and John, using these metaphors that they would be familiar with, are you able to go through what I'm able to go through? And of course, they pipe up right away and say, yeah, we are. Can you suffer? Yep, I'm with you. You will suffer. But that doesn't guarantee those 2 seats that you just asked for. You are going to suffer. If we are going to be followers of Jesus, we are going to suffer. James and John were focused on honor, but they missed a principle of the kingdom. And this principle is this, that honor comes after suffering. Honor comes after. It follows suffering. It does not precede it. That's true of Jesus, and it's true of us as his followers. If we are going to be honored, it is going to come after we have paid a price. We don't earn the honor, but the honor is given after we have shown ourselves faithful to him. Now, we are not told to seek suffering. As a matter of fact, we're told that suffering is just a natural result. In 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 12, it says, all who desire to live a godly life in Christ Jesus are going to be persecuted. If you want to follow Jesus, persecution is going to come. You don't have to seek for it. It just comes. It's a part. It's kind of like grits. If you go down south and you order anything at a restaurant, okay, you don't have to order grits. It just comes. Okay, it's just a part of the package, right? Suffering is a part of the package for the believers. Anybody who's going to follow Jesus, if you're really seeking to follow him, expect suffering. It's just going to be a part of it. So we don't seek it. Now, James and John seek honor in Mark chapter 10, and they did eventually suffer. Now, we don't see it here. Here we see them seeking honor, but later on, after they were following Jesus faithfully, they both did suffer. In Acts chapter 12, we're told how James was actually taken by Herod, and he was put to death with a sword. And we know that John also suffered exile later in his life. In Revelation chapter 1, which I don't have up here on the screens, but it says that he was exiled on the island of Patmos, a very kind of a desolate island, and a place where people were forced to be in the mines working. And so as an old man, he was exiled, potentially in forced labor, there on the island of Patmos. Now, that's in the Bible. But there's also, according to church tradition, there was something else that happened to him as well, is that he was dipped in boiling oil. And so we know that these guys suffered for the gospel. The suffering comes before the honor. They will be honored, but just not during this life. And we should not expect that we will be honored in this life as well. God may give us some honor, he may not, but we know that it's coming. The suffering is what we are guaranteed is going to come now. But we're also told that it will be worth it. In Romans chapter 8, verse 18, it says that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed in us. Present sufferings might be this high, they might be even overwhelming, but you know what? The glory that's coming is going to be even more overwhelming. There's a reward coming, but it only comes after the suffering. But since we're not told to seek suffering, we're just guaranteed that it's going to kind of come, what are we supposed to do in the meantime? Well, this is what Jesus tells them as we continue on with our passage in Mark chapter 10, is that we should focus on serving. We should focus on serving. Now, this teaching about serving comes as an internal conflict arises amongst Jesus' followers. Remember how I said that the other 10 didn't take so kindly to James and John's request? That's what we're going to read about now. Okay, look at verse 41. But hearing this, the 10 began to feel indignant with James and John. Calling them to himself, Jesus said to them, "You know that those who are recognized as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great men exercise authority over them. But it is not this way among you. But whoever wishes to become great among you shall be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you shall be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." Now, the key to that passage is the beginning of verse 43, but it's not to be this way among you. You guys know the way the Gentiles conduct themselves, okay? Now, when we think Gentiles, we're thinking like ethnic group and things like that. Read this as pagans. He's talking to Jewish guys. The people who are not religious, or at least not godly religious, they may worship idols and other things. Those pagans behave that way. You see the way the pagans behave, okay? Church, do we see the way the pagans behave? All you have to do is flip on the TV, look around. You know how the world acts. It is not to be this way among you. And actually, Jesus doesn't just say it's not supposed to be. He said it is not this way among you. This is out of place for God's people. God's people are supposed to be distinct and different. Well, what does that look like? Well, he says that you are to be ones who serve. So if everyone else is rushing for the best seats in the dinner hall, where should you be rushing? For the apron, for the mop. Okay, a couple weeks ago we talked about rushing for the plunger, fighting over that. Right? That's what we need to do. We need to be seeking to serve, the ones who are the first to go in serving. And what does Jesus say? If you want to be great, then you need to be one who is serving others. And he says, and you're serving each other. He's talking to the 12. And whoever wants to be first is to be slave of all. So what's the difference between a servant and a slave? Okay? A servant clocks in and clocks out. A servant is there voluntarily. I am serving, but I'm still maintaining my degree of autonomy and my decision-making power. What about a slave? A slave does not have decision-making power. A slave only does what the master says, when the master says, for as long as the master says. If you want to be first, you need to be the lowest. There was a professor that I had in college or in seminary. His name is Roy King. And he served as a consultant for churches sometimes. And so when a church was kind of going through a difficult time or something, he would go in and he'd help them kind of work through it, work with their board and their leadership and such. And so this would be a multi-day process. And so like in the middle of this, or maybe like day 2 or 3 of this process of working with this church, he would take their elder board or their deacon board or whatever their leadership group was, and he would come in and he would say, okay, we're going to load up, and he would take them on a field trip. And you know what they would go do? Clean gas station bathrooms. Yeah, talk about dirty work. But what he was doing through that is like, okay, guys, we're going to take it down a few notches. We're not people with titles. We're not people with this respected position within the church. What are we to be? We're to be servants. Now, cleaning the church bathroom would be one thing. Going to the gas station bathrooms and cleaning those? Yeah, total different story. Take it down a notch, take it down, take it down. That's what brings greatness in the kingdom of God, is people who will humble themselves to serve the least, to serve all. A servant gives service. A slave gives self. What is God calling us to? Yes, we are to be servants, but we're to be more than servants. We are to give not just our acts of service, we are to give ourselves. And Jesus, he gives us that example. In Philippians chapter 2, I think I have these up on the screens here, and I'm going to read them from the screen because this is the more familiar translation to me. This is from the NIV and what I grew up with, instead of the New American Standard, which I typically use. But in Philippians chapter 2, Paul is speaking to them and instructing the church, how should you be? Okay? So let's look through this together. Do nothing out of selfish ambition, like the disciples did, or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. Your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus, who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, something to be held on to, but he made himself nothing, taking on, let me make sure I'm reading this correctly, made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. Now, those who are watching online, you may not be able to see that because I think the slides were up there, but I was with my hands here, okay? He was God, but he humbled himself, He became human. He became a servant. He humbled himself to death, and a humiliating, agonizing death at that. Jesus came down, down, down to our level and then even lower in order to serve us. The Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Now remember, what comes after the suffering? What comes after the sacrifice? That's when the honor comes. So let's keep reading now in Philippians, okay? Pick it back up now in verse, let's go to the next slide there. Therefore, God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee will bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. He went from the highest place to the lowest place, and then God took him from the lowest place and put him back up in the highest place. Who's the example we're supposed to follow? Jesus. So whatever position we are occupying, we need to say, I am going to go to the lowest. I am going to serve the least. I am going to become the bottom of the stack out of love for God, love for others, and trust that God's going to sort that all out later on. Whatever honor is due me, he's going to take care of that. I don't focus on the honor to come. I just know it's coming. Right now, I'm going to focus on lowering myself and serving. Well, we can prepare to sing our closing song. So the application is threefold. Have the mind of a servant. A servant says, I'm going to give of my service. But go beyond just having a service mindset to having a slave mindset. I'm not just going to give my service. I'm going to give myself. I'm going to surrender myself. But if we're really going to follow Jesus, we need to go one step beyond that. We don't just give self and we don't just give service. We do what Jesus did. He gave his all. Everything. Even to the point of laying down his life. So as we look at how it is that we can follow Jesus, we can follow him, as we talked about a few weeks ago, taking up your cross every day and following him. We can serve the least, like he talked about with the children. We can give all, like he talked about with the rich young ruler. Sell everything, give to the poor, and follow me. And as Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem to lay down his life, and his disciples are jockeying for position with one another, he's saying that's not the way it's supposed to be. You should be seeking to serve everyone else, just like me, who came to lay down my life for you. So as we're singing this closing song, I would encourage you to think through a couple things. One, how are you following Jesus? Are you following him just as a servant? Or are you following him as a slave, fully surrendered? And then as you're working through that, God, what practical acts of service, what practical ways can I choose people? Who do you want me to be serving right now? Because I want to imitate you. So do that business with the Lord as we sing this song, and then I'll come and close this in prayer.
Just as I